Alright. Cool. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Wu Can Cook. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. I'll start by introducing myself. We're here streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, most of the things that we're doing have recipes that go along with them. Most of the time when you see me cooking stuff on stream, what I'm doing is I'm following along with a recipe that I probably have published at some point over on my YouTube channel. If you're watching over on YouTube, that's the channel that you're already on. If you're watching on Reddit, it's the channel at the bottom of the screen. Most of the things that we're cooking go along with these recipes that I've been releasing. This particular dish that we're cooking is a recipe that I released, I think, back in October or so. And I think that one was actually a gift recipe. A long time ago, though. What we're cooking today is a Chinese noodle dish called Zha Jiang Mian. If you've never had Zha Jiang Mian before, it is, in my opinion, one of the more like commonly known noodle dishes in like traditional Chinese cooking. I would say like second to chow mein, I guess, or like what Americans think is chow mein, or like the commonness of chow mein is actually Zha Jiang Mian in traditional Chinese cooking. But Zha Jiang Mian is one of those dishes that has a wide variety of ways that it can be prepared depending on where you get it. So it all really depends on, mostly it depends on who's cooking it. And I found that depending on like what restaurant I'm at, even like whose house I'm at, like whose mom is cooking it for me, it can look wildly different. So sort of like how chilies can look super different depending on who's cooking you a chili. Same thing with the Zha Jiang Mian. Particularly though, with a Chinese Zha Jiang Mian, it relies very, very heavily on the use of one specific ingredient, which is a Chinese black bean sauce. So it is the fermentation of black bean, and then we get a sauce that looks like this, which is literally called bean sauce, or they will literally label it as bean sauce. So depending on what brand you buy it from, it can be a little bit tricky to discern which particular version of bean sauce you should be getting. But it is the most important ingredient in a Zha Jiang Mian. I would say the only thing that you absolutely have to have in order to make a Zha Jiang Mian. Of all of the ingredients that we're going to be using today, and there will be quite a few ingredients, most of them are things that you could sub out or leave out entirely. So we're going to be using ground pork today. We're also going to be using some shiitake mushrooms. So we're doing some star anise, a couple of things. Almost everything that we're going to be using can be things that you can either substitute out or leave out entirely. The number one thing that you absolutely have to have if you want to make a Zha Jiang Mian is black bean sauce. You can't make it without black bean sauce, unless you want to make a Zha Jiang Mian that is not Chinese. So we're going to get to all of that stuff today. If you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about Chinese noodles, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully we can be helpful or informative, or just generally fun to watch, I guess. So we're going to take a look at all that stuff shortly. Starting things off, though, I'm starting with some finely minced ginger that I just chopped up. It was already peeled because I was using it earlier. And now I'm getting to my garlic, which I'm just giving a really good crush with the flat side of my knife. And then once you crush garlic, though, by the way, it will fully fall apart. So you'll notice a couple of things just happen when I just crush this piece of garlic. The most important thing, or most useful thing at least, is that the skin comes off. You don't need to waste your time trying to peel your garlic. Just give it a really good smash with the flat of your knife, and it pretty much comes apart. So that's my favorite way of de-skinning a piece of garlic, as long as you don't need whole pieces of garlic going on. And then from there, you have a couple of options. If you want, you can do your fine mince, but in my experience, usually when I work with garlic, I don't bother because it's not going to make that much of a difference in the end. So usually what I just end up doing is giving it a really good crush. It does need to be smashed to bits. And then once it's smashed, everything else will sort of just fall apart as soon as you slice through it. So I'm giving it a quick slice. And the crush should do everything else. So you'll notice my garlic is pretty much in pieces already. So not quite as thorough as a fine mince, but I find is good enough for a wok fry. If I was doing something really, really specific where I needed to be careful about like the general shape and quality of my garlic, I probably would do the fine mince. But in this particular case, when we're just throwing it into a wok, by the time it ends up in that wok heat and once it starts hitting that oil, everything's going to fall apart anyway. So it's not really that essential that you do your fine mince and you're wasting your time. Oh, RKK6, yeah, how's it going? Hello. Good to see you again. I missed you. I missed you yesterday. You tuned in a little bit late. I think you tuned in right at the last like 10 minutes or so. So maybe caught the tail end of yesterday's stream. Wednesday streams are a little bit earlier, so that's probably why. Cool. All right. Before I forget, let me get some water going. All right. Let's see. Next up, let's do some garnish. So next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice up some carrot here. So in a Chinese Zha Jiang Mian, you can garnish your Zha Jiang Mian with any number of veggies. You could just leave the garnish out. You could top it with green onions. You could top it with carrots, are really, really popular. That's how I used to do it when I was a kid. My dad would top it with shredded cucumber, excuse me. My dad used to love doing it with shredded zucchini, which I very much disliked because I always thought zucchini was kind of gross. My favorite way of finishing it is with some carrot. So I'm going to give quick peel to these carrots, and then what we're going to do is chop them into planks. If you're really committed, probably a fine julienne would be the best thing that you can do. Or a julienne cut, not fine julienne. A julienne cut would be the best thing that you could do for your carrots. I don't care that much, but generally the goal of our carrot chopping in this case is to get it as close to the general shape and size as our noodles. So we want them to be pretty close to the texture of our noodles, so that when we throw these things in raw, they're not going to be like sticking out. So if your carrots are too fine, or if your carrots are too large, you're going to have weird bites of carrot, and then it's going to stick out. So we don't want that. So we want it to blend into the texture of our noodles. So to that end, we're fine. I just decided halfway through chopping this to do our fine julienne. All right, so for a fine julienne, it starts off looking pretty similar to a plank, or it is essentially a plank. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stack our carrots on top of each other and then cut downward from there. And that gives us these nice strips of carrots. So again, stacking them on top and then cutting downward. So if you're really, really fast, you could do this. I've seen guys who julienne cut like crazy fast. I feel like I'm like a decent with a knife, but I still don't do julienne cuts that fast. So it is also why it's one of my least favorite chops, because it's just generally like an annoying and labor-intensive chop. All right, cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. Today we're doing a Chinese noodle dish called Zha Jiang Mian. Zha Jiang Mian is one of those noodle dishes that comes up in many different Asian cultures. I have also cooked this on stream many times before too, so I have talked about this before. But there's definitely a Korean version, which is called Zha Jiang Mian. There's a Japanese version that's done with ramen. I had almost all of them. What's most distinctive to me about a Chinese Zha Jiang Mian, though, is that it relies very heavily on the use of black bean sauce, which we're going to get to in a minute. This particular version that I'm working on today is loosely based on the version that my dad used to make when we were kids, which is pretty Americanized because we grew up in the Bay Area. So that's how my dad always cooked it, so we're going to take a look at that. If you're looking for the recipes for everything that I cook, pretty much everything that I cook on stream, it has a recipe video that goes along with it. Those recipe videos, they all live over on my YouTube channel, so if you're looking for all of that stuff, that's all over there, which is youtube.com/woocancook. So if you're watching on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, you're already there. Lots of people already over there already. I know people have been starting to follow along. The YouTube channel is a good source for a number of different things. Mainly, though, in addition to all of the recipe videos that come out, that's also where the concurrent live stream lives. So if you want to find out what I'm going to be cooking in the next couple of weeks, that all lives over on YouTube, and you can find out that information pretty quickly. So I think that comes out, that goes out as far as like 2-3 weeks. And then every Friday we have new recipe videos coming out on that channel, which this Friday will be, so tomorrow is a chicken katsu, so a Japanese chicken katsu, which I'm super stoked for, because it is the first time that I have ever tried to deep fry panko breadcrumb, which is really, really interesting. It has a really interesting texture to it that is very specifically the quality that you come across in chicken katsu. So that particular recipe, the one that's coming out tomorrow, is a part of a larger series that I've been doing where I've been hacking a lot of the foods that you can find here in the San Francisco Bay Area restaurant scene. So the particular version that I'm hacking for the recipe tomorrow comes from a restaurant in Oakland on Grand Avenue called Shogun. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel. Check out that stuff, lots of fun. New recipes coming out every Friday. This Friday is chicken katsu. Next Friday we have a beef chow fun that's coming up. I just finished editing the video for egg foo young. That's going to be really interesting. I'm super excited for egg foo young. Really interesting. Egg foo young was really interesting to dig into because I discovered that an egg foo young, a traditional egg foo young. What's really interesting actually about egg foo young is that it actually does have a roots in traditional Chinese cooking, even though it is like a very, very American Chinese dish to get. That's like a really, really iconic Chinese American dish is egg foo young. But what's really interesting about it is that the original, the traditional style of egg foo young does not look at all like the Chinese American version. The Americanized egg foo young is essentially an egg scramble that's scrambled in a wok. But a really traditional egg foo young is actually not scrambled, it's deep fried. So I didn't know that because I have not eaten that much egg foo young in my life. So. A Delaware smash. That's the first time you've ever had chicken katsu. Wow. You should eat chicken katsu more. It's my favorite kind of one of my favorite kinds of fried chicken. It's amazing. Yeah, I love exploring. I have been frying a lot of chicken lately, so I have been enjoying the practice of exploring all of the different types of fried chicken that you come across in the wide variety of cultures that you can find. So Japanese fried chicken, Chinese fried chicken, Korean fried chicken. We did a gochujang Korean fried chicken recently. And just generally exploring what fried chicken looks like across a wide array of different Asian cultures, which always looks super, super different. And then kind of part of what the Chinese American hack series that we've been doing is essentially taking a look at especially because we do a lot of fried chicken recipes, is sort of looking at what is Asian fried chicken and how is it so wildly different from American fried chicken. And it really is. It's very, very different from American fried chicken in a number of different ways. So things as far as tempura batter, but also buttermilk fried chicken is really iconic to southern American southern fried chicken. Things like an egg batter versus the tempura batter, stuff like that, all really, really interesting. So, what I just did is I just hydrated some, these are shiitake mushrooms. I just added these to some boiled water. So this is hot water that we're gonna soak. This will take, this will probably take about 5 minutes. If you have really thick shiitake mushrooms, I started saying this anytime I use shiitake mushrooms now. But if you have particularly thick shiitake mushrooms, I always recommend giving that quite a bit of time. If your shiitake mushrooms are really thick, that stuff can take a solid 30 minutes, 20-30 minutes to hydrate. So super often, if I have really thick shiitake mushrooms, I'll even start hydrating those off stream. I'll start them when I start cooking the rice because they take that long to hydrate. Fortunately, the type of shiitake mushrooms that I'm working with today are really thin. They're boutique shiitake mushrooms. So they're really, really thin, so they hydrate really quickly. And they're also really tasty, so one of my favorites. Cool. All right. Next up, is our ground meat. Today I'm using ground pork, and I'm going to do a really simple marinade. I have been going pretty simple on my marinades lately, mostly because a lot of the sauces that I've been assembling, they don't seem to need quite that much independent flavor imparted to the ground meat, especially when you're working with ground pork, because it already has so much fat and it already tastes quite interesting because it is so fatty already. I've found that you don't particularly need to rely super heavily on the use of marinade with ground meats and things like Zha Jiang Mian. So what I'm doing here, that was 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, and that's a single tablespoon of sesame oil. And what are we doing that star anise? And that's it. I'm going to do a pinch of salt too. And that's going to be it for my marinade though. We're going to just let that go for a little bit. If we're really committed, this should marinate for at least 30 minutes. I don't think I ever let my marinades go for 30 minutes unless I'm taking too long to cook stuff. That's mostly just because I don't feel like waiting that long. But if you're really committed to making sure that your ground meat tastes interesting, 30 minutes at least. You could go up to an hour and it would taste even better. But honestly, if you don't have 30 minutes or if you just don't feel like waiting 30 minutes, it'll be just fine. All right. Last up, before we start cooking, I'm going to assemble my sauce here. And we're going to add a couple of things to our sauce. But there are a couple of pretty iconic things, but mainly the most important thing that we're going to be adding, as I mentioned this earlier too, is black bean sauce. So this is the type, kunchang is my favorite type of black bean sauce, but you can find any number of different kinds of black bean sauce. Kunchang is the yellow labeled one, and it's my personal favorite. Hermina, how's it going? Yeah. Ooh, braised oxtail. Oxtail is really hard, but I would definitely be down to try it. But yeah, I do love oxtail. I haven't had oxtail in quite a while, but I would definitely be down to look into that. I will add it to the list. Thank you for the requests. Lots of people have been asking, sending in requests lately, so that's been cool. I know, I think Scott sent in a request for pad ki mao, which is one that I've been meaning to get to. Pad ki mao is really interesting because we actually already had done pad see ew, and pad ki mao and pad see ew are very, very similar. They have only 1 or 2 small differences. So I've been holding off on doing a pad ki mao because there's not a lot that's going to really change from my pad see ew recipe. So, but I am planning on getting to it pretty soon. This is a little bit too much. I am planning on getting to that pretty soon. The main difference is that a pad ki mao has a little bit more veggies than a pad see ew, but otherwise the pad ki mao and a pad see ew look very, very similar. If you're not familiar, a pad ki mao is the Thai noodle dish that is colloquially referred to as drunken noodles, and it's done with super thin rice, chow fun rice noodles, and then cooked in a dark soy sauce braise, which is really, really tasty and will also actually look very, very similar to pad see ew, which is almost exactly the same thing, except that a pad see ew has a little bit more spice and a little bit more vegetables. So super often in a pad ki mao, you'll find things like bell pepper, onions, even bok choy, stuff like that will come up in a pad ki mao quite often. Carrots are super, super often found in a pad ki mao. But a pad see ew is very specifically just chow fun plus dark soy sauce and gailan, or broccoli. So anyway, weird tangent. I don't know why I just tangented that far off. But today, what we're working on right now is our Zha Jiang Mian sauce. So that was 2 tablespoons of black bean sauce, which is very, very concentrated. So you'll notice that I actually started off with the notes that I'm reading right here say 4 tablespoons, and I actually think that's too much. So I'm going to pull back. And that I started off with 3 tablespoons in the bowl, and I actually just pulled it back. So that was closer to 2.5 tablespoons. And if it needs it, I can add more to it. But I'm a little bit concerned because the kunchang black bean sauce is a little bit more concentrated than the version that I was working with when I wrote this recipe. So what I'm doing is I'm just sort of dissolving this black bean sauce, and that's half a cup of beef stock. And we want to make sure that that stuff sort of comes apart before it gets to the wok, because if it's still in a solid form, it will absolutely clump together, and I have definitely made that mistake. All right. Next up are a couple other liquid ingredients. That's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. And then I'm going to get this in now so we have as much time as possible to give some flavor. This is going to be a single star anise pod. So star anise, it looks like this. It's a solid form of a spice. You can crush this stuff up and you can throw it in. What I like doing is just throwing it in whole. I usually like throwing it in whole into marinades. Today I'm not actually going to put it into a marinade. Today it's just going straight into our sauce. And I'm going to leave it in my sauce all the way up until plating. So I'm going to keep it in the wok, in the dish, all the way up until we plate. So very similar to how you would treat a bay leaf if you're cooking like a Italian food, like a bolognese or a ragu. We leave that bay leaf in. Sometimes bay leaves will end up on the dinner table even, because it's like imparting that flavor. The longer that it sits in, the more flavor that you'll get out of that stuff. So star anise is really, really interesting, has a really pungent flavor. It's very aromatic. So if you leave it in for super, super long, like for example, if you were to leave it into your marinade and let it marinate with that meat for a full hour, you can get a lot of flavor out of it. You can also toast that stuff and it will be even more flavorful. Today I'm not going to put it in my marinade because I know that the marinade is not going to go for very long. So what I'm doing is I'm just adding it to my sauce, and we're going to keep this in the wok for all the way up until we plate. I might pull it out at the very end. So, all right. So that's my star anise pod. Next up, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of hoisin sauce. Hoisin sauce I found is like the one Asian sauce that lots of folks are more familiar with as hoisin sauce. I kind of think of it as like Chinese ketchup. Because it's so sweet, it has a lot of sugar in it, which I love using in sauce bases in order to get really interesting qualities of sugar out. So it is going to be, I think it's going to be the only real source of sweetness in our sauce today, are those 2 tablespoons of hoisin sauce. And the other source, I wouldn't say this is a real source of sweetness, but a little bit, is some Shaoxing wine, which is essentially dry cooking sherry. It's also very difficult to pour. Shaoxing wine is a little bit bright in the way that sherry is, so it is bright and it has a lot of sugar in it. But I actually don't think it will derive that much sweetness, not nearly as much sweetness as you'll get out of 2 whole tablespoons of hoisin sauce. And then following up, this is 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar. Then this is going to be 1 tablespoon of sesame oil. And finally, where's my oyster sauce? 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce. Lots of people ask me if you can switch out oyster sauce with hoisin sauce. I'm guessing that the reason that people ask that is because it looks so similar. But they are 2 very, very different flavors. So I would absolutely not recommend using these 2 sauces interchangeably. Hoisin sauce, like I mentioned before, it has a lot of sugar in it. But oyster sauce, it comes from the fermentation of oyster, as the name implies, which means that you get quite a bit of fermented and pungent quality to it. That is going to keep happening, by the way. I have not yet figured out a solution to keeping that shutter from turning off. But I love using a little bit of oyster sauce in my sauce bases so that we can get like some fishy fermented qualities to it. I would say if you don't have oyster sauce, the next best thing would be something like fish sauce or even anchovy. All of those would work. What we're really after are like the fermented qualities of fish. So, Zha Jiang's, yeah, totally. Oyster sauce, it's like one of my favorite things to bring up in like dark sauce bases, like Zha Jiang Mian. I also use it in like pad see ew a lot. What else? Anything that like I pair it very, very often anytime that I'm using dark soy sauce. So like if I'm using dark soy sauce and like right now I'm thinking of a Shanghainese lion's head meatball, which is done in like meatball that's braised in a dark soy sauce base. I like adding a little bit of oyster sauce to it, and that kind of gives us this nice fermented depth of flavor. Yeah, that needs a little bit more black bean sauce. What is, oh, good question. What is vegan oyster sauce? Yeah. Brandino, yeah, thank you for asking that. That's a really good question. It actually reminds me to talk about vegan oyster sauce. So if you're vegetarian or if you're vegan and you can't eat oyster sauce, there are absolutely vegan versions of all of those sauces, including oyster sauce, but also fish sauce has a vegan version. And they're really interesting, really tasty. And in my experience, almost indistinguishable. I can't tell the difference. Especially if you're burying it really deep, I can't tell the difference. And I believe it's made from mushroom powder, so it's getting like a lot of umami from crushed, like pulverized dried shiitake mush. I think it's coming from shiitake mushrooms, and then it's getting a lot of like really interesting umami from that. And then from there, I don't know how you get to fishy umami from mushroom powder, but they figured it out. So probably a lot of MSG too, I would guess, like mushroom powder and MSG. All right. Yeah, that's better. Cool. So that's our sauce. I'm seasoning to taste, excuse me. So I just added a little bit more black bean sauce, and I think I'm going to add a pinch of salt. More than that. And I think that's going to bring it to life. Yeah. That's nice. Super often, though, you'll see me, I will skip the use of salt altogether in a lot of recipes. Because very often I find the use of salt kind of tends to get in the way of a lot of umami qualities. So I find like if you add salt to sauce bases that are using soy sauce a lot already, it kind of gets in the way, and then it sort of distracts from the true intention of like those sauces that you're trying to build out. Yeah, Brandina, yeah, totally. Thank you for asking. That's a good question. People ask me about vegetarian versions all the time. Because a lot of times, like, Chinese food is unnecessarily not vegetarian friendly. It's just has, like, Hongsha tofu, for example, is entirely vegetarian. It is entirely a tofu dish, except for the fact that it relies very heavily on the use of fish sauces, so oyster sauce, and I believe it has fish sauce in it too, which makes it not vegetarian at all. Definitely not vegan friendly, but also for sure not vegetarian friendly, which is why I think those sauces exist. All right, so I'm slicing up my shiitake mushrooms here. You'll notice that they are fully hydrated. Definitely, if you have thicker shiitake mushrooms, I'm going to say this one more time to really nail the point home. If you have thicker mushrooms, they have to hydrate for much longer than what we just did. I think mine were hydrating for probably like a little bit less than 10 minutes. But if your mushrooms are particularly thick, they will at least take 20 to 30 minutes minimum. I'm actually going to leave them like this. There are a number of different ways that you can prepare these mushrooms. Usually I like to dice them. Today I think I'm going to leave them whole like this so that they'll have a little bit more presence. But do it however you want to do it. All right. Cool. Let's head over to the stove. All right. Did I forget anything? Oh, I forgot one thing. Let's see, before we get to the stove, actually, the last thing I want to do is measure out some noodles. So we're going to get to our noodles before we get to our cooking. Today I'm working with, these are fresh Shanghainese noodles. Which I happened to be at the noodle market today, so I happened to get my hands on some fresh ones. If you've watched these streams before, you will definitely have seen me use like prepackaged stuff all the time. I believe in one of these recipe videos, I for sure used dry fettuccine at one point because I just forgot, or I think the original flat noodles that I had bought like went bad. But use whatever you have. So definitely you can sub out and use, you could use spaghetti. That would probably be even better. But what we're looking for here is 12 ounces of noodles. That should do it. Fresh noodles, however, are very delicate, so we want to be very careful with how we use these noodles. They are, I think these are probably like cut like earlier today, so you can see how like stretchy and like chewy they're going to be. They are super, super delicate, so I'm going to be very careful with how we cook them. Today I am going to actually cook it in a pot of water. Normally I don't do that, but I actually think it might work. But we're going to be really, really quick with it. So before we start cooking, we're going to prepare. Because this cooking process is going to happen in, no kidding, it will probably the entire process is going to come together in like 1 minute. Because these noodles are so delicate, we have to halt the cooking very, very quickly. So I'm going to cook them in boiling water, and then I'm going to pull them out. And then because they're going to cook so quickly, I'm going to pull them out and then immediately blanch them in ice water. So they're only going to take about a minute to cook in that boiling water. So I'm going to cook really, really quickly, pull them out, and then we're going to immediately drop it into an ice bath. And that's going to make sure that we don't overcook our noodles. And if you've ever had mushy overcooked like chow mein or chow fun, that's how it happens. All right, so I have my ice bath ready. No kidding, those noodles are going to finish in 1 minute. So we're going to be very, very prepared. Cool. Now let's hop over. Yeah. Oh, if you don't cook Asian foods that much, but you have all the ingredients, what's the best way to keep them good? Oh yeah. Like keep them fresh. Most of the Asian ingredients that, well, it kind of depends on which ingredients you're talking about. But a lot of like Chinese or like Asian in general, Asian ingredients have very, very long shelf lives. So like soy sauce for sure will keep for a super long time. I don't bother refrigerating my soy sauce, and it will for sure keep for at least a year. And that's mostly because like a lot of Asian sauces, they're fermented. So they are already like when they're made, they sit out at room temperature. So there's not really a risk of it going bad. Probably the worst thing that could happen is it could over ferment, and then it will become like really, really pungent and really concentrated. But like that also like applies to like a number of different sauces. So that includes like doubanjiang, gochujang. That probably includes oyster sauce, hoisin sauce, definitely all of the vinegars and alcohols. So like Shaoxing wine, rice wine, all of those things that you can keep in your pantry, and it will stay for quite a long time. I know I have a box of miso paste that I kept for, no kidding, I think I had it for like 5 years, and it was fine. There was no problem with it. Probably, if anything, it got better because it just kept fermenting. So if you have like a pantry full of Asian ingredients, that stuff will keep in the pantry for a super long time. Probably your bigger problem is going to be like all of those ingredients taking up a whole shitload of room in your pantry, so, which is my problem. That it takes up a lot of room in the pantry. Yeah. Brendy, have I talked about my knife yet? No, but lots of people ask about that, so I guess I could talk about it. We have a little bit of extra time today, so I'll talk about it. So this is my knife. It is a French chef's knife. It's called a Père Noir Nogent. I have two of them, so you'll very often see me using one of these two. This one is dull. This is the one that I've been using for the last like month or two, so it's gotten pretty dull. And the only reason that I have two of them is because I got them for a really good deal. I found them at an estate sale for $10. Both of them are vintage, so I don't think that this Père Noir Nogent knife is still in production. I don't think you can find it anymore. The more common knife that you'll find of that knife-like shape and profile is the Sabatier, which looks like this. You'll notice that this knife is much larger. This is like a 16. I think this is a 16-inch butcher's knife, which I very infrequently find a use for this knife. Because I don't have much use for chopping things that are 16 inches. But when I do find a use, I love breaking this knife out. But it also reminds me to mention that the Sabatier, the French Sabatier knife, is still actively in production. So if you're looking for a similar knife with a similar shape and profile, I would go out and look for a Sabatier. And I think you can actually get those for reasonably cheap. I think like a good Sabatier you can find for like $80, maybe even less. But lots of people ask about like the metal. And the reason that it kind of looks the way that it looks is because it's made of carbon steel. So that's why it kind of has like a deep patina. It's not because it's rusted, it's because it's made of carbon steel. So carbon steel ages, unlike stainless steel, which does not age. It will last forever. So like this, for example, these bowls will look this way for 100 years. That's what's so great about stainless steel. All right. So, over on my stove, this is my wok. Over on my stove, I have on my side burner has been boiling a rolling pot of water. So just like we would do with Italian pastas, we've got a rolling boil to this pot of water. And these noodles, they're gonna cook in, I would say, like a minute. So I'm gonna even set a timer. And I'm gonna drop my noodles. We're gonna give that a minute and then immediately pull them out. No salt, so the pasta water, so a couple of different things to note if you're more familiar with cooking Italian pastas. We don't salt the pasta water, and we also don't save the pasta water, and that's just one of the qualities of Asian cooking. Those two things, they come from Italian cooking. Very, very often if you see like carbonara recipes or like bolognese recipes, you will see the recipe will call for very heavily salting the water, so like a quarter cup of salt. And then reserving a whole bunch of that water, and that's how you build out thick sauces in Italian cooking. In Chinese cooking, we actually don't do that. We get the thickness from our sauce is going to come from cornstarch, which we're going to add a little bit later. Actually, I don't think there's any cornstarch. And the salt is unnecessary because it's all going to come from our sauce. So unlike Italian cooking, in Chinese cooking, we don't bother reserving that water, which I know is a big cardinal sin if you're familiar with Italian cooking. All right. So I misspoke. I'm actually meant to do this for 2 minutes, not 1 minute. That's 2 minutes. We're going to go for 2 full minutes here. And I'm keeping an eye on the general texture of my noodle here, so I'm making sure that it doesn't get too overcooked or too chewy. But remember that, especially with fresh noodles, but this is generally going to be true for most Asian noodles, is that they're super, super delicate. So unlike a freeze-dried fettuccine or spaghetti, this stuff, it will overcook. I think like a fettuccine, you have to give like 10 to 12 minutes. With a fresh Shanghai noodle like this, 2 minutes max, I would say. No more than 2.5 minutes. And that looks done to me, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this out. All right. So, this is going to happen really quick. I'm pulling out my pasta, dumping the water, and then most importantly, we're dropping it into our ice bath, and that's going to halt our cooking process. So I'm making sure that this water gets a nice coating to our noodles. What that's going to do is going to halt the noodles from overcooking. So because noodles will continue to overcook or continue to carry overcook after they've been pulled out of the water, we want to make sure that that doesn't happen because they will absolutely overcook at that point. So I'm adding it to a bath of ice water, and that's just going to cool the noodles down and halt the cooking process while we do everything else. Cool. Yeah. So I just swapped my pot out for my wok, and we're going to start preheating that wok, and then we're going to start cooking from there. What brand of oyster? Oh yeah, good question. What brand of oyster sauce? So I have been using the Lee Kum Kee oyster sauce. Is this Lee Kum Kee? Actually, yeah, this is Lee Kum Kee. So that's the wrong camera. So we can take a look. This is the type of oyster. This is the brand of oyster sauce that I usually get. It's made by Lee Kum Kee, which is like one of the big distributors of Asian sauces. But what's more important, so Lee Kum Kee makes 2 different kinds of oyster sauce. They both look very, very similar. They're almost indistinguishable. But the main thing that we want to watch out for is that there's this little kid pushing a boat on their logo. And the one with the little kid pushing a boat, it's, I think, the one that they call their premium oyster sauce, and it has like more oyster in it, so it has more flavor to it. So if you're like when you're at an Asian grocery store and you go to look for oyster sauce, you will see like freaking 15 different oyster sauces, and it's crazy how much like options you're gonna have, how many different kinds of oyster sauces that you'll find. Kikkoman for sure makes one. There are so many different ones that you can buy. But the one, if you're looking for the right one, or the one that most Asian households will have, it's the one with that little kid pushing a boat, because it has more oyster in it. Yeah, Crystal. Yeah, little kid with a boat. It's for real. That's like old grandma recommendation. I think I learned that from my mom, who probably learned it from her grandma. Look for the one that has the little kid. Other than that little kid, I think the bottles are identical, which is like insane. But you'll see it on the shelf, and one of them, like the premium oyster sauce, is like $1 more, and you're gonna look at them and you're gonna be like, what? Why? I'm obviously gonna buy the cheaper one because they're the same, right? But they're not the same. Get the premium one. Spend the extra $1. All right. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Wednesdays at 6 p.m., Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30. Today we're doing a Chinese Zha Jiang Mian, which is a wok fried noodle dish that relies very heavily on the use of black bean sauce. If you're looking for the recipes, all of those recipes, they live over on my YouTube channel. So if you're watching on YouTube, that's the channel you're already on. If you're watching on Reddit, that's the channel at the bottom of the screen. All of those recipe videos, those come out every Friday. So this coming Friday, so tomorrow, we have Japanese chicken katsu, which I'm super stoked for because it's the first time that I've ever used panko breadcrumb in a deep fry. So that's coming out this Friday. Next Friday is going to be a Chinese beef chow fun. And then I forget, coming after that is going to be an egg foo young. So a couple of those are from a really popular series that I've been doing where I've been reproducing a lot of like really iconic Chinese American dishes. Things like General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken. The one adding to it more recently is going to be an egg foo young. And like kind of taking a look at like what are the American qualities about Chinese American food. And like how did Chinese food change when it came to America, and like what were Chinese people doing in order to get Americans to eat Chinese food. So and then a lot of times what's really interesting is we'll deconstruct those dishes like General Tso's chicken, which is really just American chicken, and kind of take a look what it would look like if we were to try and reproduce those dishes from like a traditional Chinese lens. So what would happen if we actually tried to make a traditional version of General Tso's chicken? Which is really interesting because General Tso's chicken is really just American fried chicken. So stuff like that all lives over on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely hop over and check that out. We're working our way to 2,700 subscribers by the end of the month, we're coming up on it pretty quick. So I think we're like 100 or so short. So if you want to help us hit that subscriber goal, help over and check it out. If you're not interested, please do not subscribe. I don't know why people subscribe when they're not interested. Sarah, you did not get the one with the kid. Oh no, you'll be okay. Oyster sauce comes up in so many different dishes. You'll use that oyster sauce, and then the next time you'll have the right thing. I would say probably is just use a little bit more of it if you don't have the premium one, and you'll be fine. That's funny though. Will the noodles be okay standing in water? They will not. Thank you for reminding me. I should pull them out. Yeah, most importantly though is we want to hit it with that ice water, and that's going to cool them down so that they don't overcook. So here's my noodles now. Oops. Cool. So yeah, that's the YouTube channel. Every time people ask about that knife a lot. It's one of my favorites. But I also like stand by the fact that so I do have a fancy knife now, but what's more important than having a fancy knife is having a sharp knife. So if you can't afford fancy knives, I used a Kamachi, which is like a $5 Costco knife, and I used that knife for no kidding like 15 years. I had that knife for a long time before I upgraded, and it worked just fine because it was very, very sharp. I like sharpened it like every time I used it. Before I used it, I would sharpen it. So that's like way more important than having a fancy knife is having a sharp knife. Even a dull fancy knife will not be any use. So a really, really sharp cheap knife is a lot more useful than a really, really dull fancy knife. So if you have a Ginsu or if you have like a Cutco knife, all of those are going to be fine as long as it's super sharp. I would say is if you're investing in knifeware, start off by investing in something to sharpen your knife first. Cool. All right, so I think we're about ready to start cooking. So today we're going with grapeseed oil because I ran out of peanut oil and I forgot to buy more. In wok cooking though, probably the more like traditional used oil would be peanut oil. But really anything that has high heat potential will work. So anything with a high smoke point. So today I'm using, this is actually grapeseed oil. Canola oil also works, vegetable oil, all of those are going to work fine. Just avoid things like olive oil, which has a really, really low smoke point, and you're going to do fine. All right, so going in first are my aromatics. So this is my ginger, followed by my garlic. And then we're going to bloom this just long enough until it's fragrant. That usually for me is about 15 seconds, 10-15 seconds. But use your nose and smell. When you start smelling ginger and garlic, you're good. All right, next up going in is my pork. And I'm doing my best not to just drop this in. What we want to do here is break up those little pieces of pork. So we don't want large chunks of pork here. It's super important. If you just drop pork in, it will definitely clump up, and then you're going to have too many large bits of pork. So we want to be very diligent about breaking this stuff apart. If you have like really, really fresh ground meat, it will be super pebbly and you won't have to bother with this. But if you have pork that you just pulled out of the freezer like me, it will definitely clump up if you're not careful. All right. So I'm going to let that go for about a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes. Probably not that long. We were looking for, that doesn't need to be completely cooked through, but we do want the bulk of our cook process to be done at this point in order to make sure that we have some very like smoky and wok fried pork here. And my favorite part about using ground pork for this dish is that it renders a lot of fat. So we have all of this pork fat coming out down here, which is super, super useful for building out thick sauces. When I don't use ground pork, or if I'm using something leaner, I love using a little bit of bacon and then rendering out some bacon fat first. Today I skipped the bacon because we're using ground pork, so there's already quite a bit of fat going on. Yeah, Brandino, that's totally fine, yeah. No worries. Yeah, I totally don't mind answering the same questions. It's all good. All right, going in next are my mushrooms. Where did I put my sauce? Oh, yeah, that's looking good. And then finally, we're going to drop our noodles in. And then before we add our sauce, I like to make sure that the meat is nice and like combined with our noodles before we add that sauce. Because once the sauce gets into the wok, it's going to be a little bit harder to combine this stuff. So I like to make sure that we have a pretty cohesive mix to our noodles before we add this sauce. And then last up, so super, super important, I've started mentioning this pretty much with every dish now, but super, super important is don't just dump that sauce in. So what we want to do here is add it in portions. So I'm going to add, this is usually about like a third, a quarter of it, maybe even less at a time. And what we're doing is we're making sure that we don't over season our noodle dish. So if it needs all of the sauce, you can add it, but if it doesn't need all of it, don't add it all. I think we need it all. So I definitely, usually at the last like 25% of my sauce, I like to stop and taste it. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I'm going to use the rest of this. I am very glad that we held back on that black bean sauce because it was a little bit too thick. Any more than that and it would have been too much, for sure. Alright. What kind of wok? Oh yeah, what kind of wok am I using? I don't actually know what brand of wok it is. I got this at a restaurant supply store. I think it doesn't have a brand. I think it's just like an unbranded piece of carbon steel. So like, essentially that's it. I've heard a lot of good things about the Joyce Chen wok, the Joyce Chen carbon steel wok. I've actually cooked on one. My friend has one and it works really great. I always, anytime people ask about woks, I say more important than the brand of the wok is what the wok is made out of. So you want to look for woks that are made out of a metal that have high heat retention. So super important. I love things. So mine is made out of carbon steel. You could also get stainless steel or cast iron. If you have an electric top, cast iron works really great. But mainly we want to avoid things like Teflon nonstick woks because they're going to have a lot of trouble keeping heat and keeping that wok hot. So and unfortunately, a lot of the woks that you'll find at like Walmart and Target and stuff, they're going to be made out of Teflon nonstick, and you're going to have a lot of trouble. If you've ever tried to cook in a Teflon nonstick wok and you found that your stir fries kept coming out like super soggy and porridgey, that's because Teflon does not get hot. It does not get super hot. That's what makes Teflon so great for like frying eggs or scrambling eggs, is because you can do that over like medium heat, and no matter where your fire is at, a Teflon pan will not get too hot for scrambling eggs. That's why they're really great for scrambling eggs. But conversely, for the same purpose, if you try and wok cook in a Teflon pan that's not going to get hot or super hot, you're going to have a lot of trouble because it's just going to like sit around medium heat forever, and you're going to end up with a mushy stir fry. All right. So the last thing that I'm doing here is I'm just rinsing out my wok, and then we're going to give it a wipe down, and that's going to be it. Super important when you finish cooking, especially in carbon steel woks. The last thing that you want to do before you start eating is take care of your wok. So season it, wipe it down, clean it out while it's still hot because it will have a nice non-stick surface going. And then give it a coating of oil on all sides. That includes the bottom. And that ought to do it. And that's going to just prevent it from like oxidizing or rusting. So especially if you don't use your wok every day, I use my wok every day, so I probably don't need to season it that much. But especially if you are not using your wok every day, super important to give it that good seasoning when you finish cooking. Otherwise, it will start rusting. So like if you're like waiting a week or 2 weeks or so before in between uses, it will absolutely start rusting on you. Yeah, cool. So I mentioned this earlier, but I did every 30 minutes. That's going to turn off. Sorry, guys. I mentioned this earlier, but I did end up leaving in my star anise pod. So here's my star anise pod. It is still in there. Okay, we can go ahead and take it out now because we're ready to eat. But the longer that star anise pod stays in, the more flavor you'll get out of it. So I love leaving it in. You could even leave it all the way into the dinner table and then pull it out on the dinner table. Which I'm sure like lots of grandmas will do. I know for sure that's how my grandma used to do it. She would leave that. I remember finding the star anise pod all the time. All right. So I'm topping this. This is going to be topped with a little bit of carrot. And again, if you don't have carrot or if you don't like carrot, You can use any number of different kinds of toppings to finish your or garnish your noodles. You can use green onions, that will work. You can use carrots, zucchinis. My dad used to love grating zucchini as a finish, which I really didn't like because I hate zucchini. Whatever you like or whatever you happen to have, anything that works well when it's fresh is going to work really well. All right. And that is it. Cool. There we go. This is a fun new camera. Go. Cool. So that's my Zha Jiang Mian. If you're looking for the recipe, this one lives over on my YouTube channel already. I think we came out with this recipe back in October or so. All of the recipes for everything that I cook, it lives over on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked that stuff out yet, definitely hop over and check that stuff out. Lots of fun content coming up over on the YouTube channel. Every Friday there's new recipes coming out. So this Friday coming up is a Japanese chicken katsu, which is going to be really fun. Friday after that is going to be a beef chow fun. And then coming up after that is an egg foo young. Egg foo young is going to be part of our, actually the egg foo young is part of our TV and film hack series, which is going to be really interesting because it's hacking an egg foo young from the Aristocats, which is one of the films that just got pulled from Disney Plus for being racist. So that's really fun and interesting. So lots of stuff like that coming up over on my YouTube channel. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely check what's going on over there. There's a whole series that's dedicated to reproducing foods from TV and film, which is where the egg foo young is going to be. There's a bunch of stuff from The Legend of Korra, where we're doing a lot of like travel-friendly Chinese dishes like zhongzi, like rice cakes, custard buns, things like that. A lot of like snacks and pastries because that's like the kind of food that they eat in Legend of Korra because they're traveling all the time. Stuff like that comes up on the TV and film hack series. We have another series that's entirely dedicated to restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you happen to live around here, you can check out like a lot of the dishes, like hacks for a lot of the dishes that you'll find in like the Oakland and San Francisco areas. Stuff like we did Ni Cha Tai's Pad See The Pad Kim Mao is going to be coming up soon because I'm working on that one. Beef Chow Fun is the one that's coming up in 2 weeks, and that's a hack from Shandong here in Oakland, stuff like that. There's a whole different series that people have been really interested in, which is a Chinese American hack series. So I've been deconstructing a lot of like really Americanized Chinese food from places like P.F. Chang's, Panda Express, things like that, and kind of taking a look at like what are the American qualities of these really Americanized dishes, because a lot of the Chinese American dishes that people associate with Chinese food here in the States, it's not really Chinese food, it's really just American food. So things like honey sesame chicken, for example, that's really just like American honey glazed chicken on top of rice, and it's really good, but it's not Chinese food, that's just American food. So what's really interesting about that series is usually I'll do a second version where I'll deconstruct those dishes and reassemble them in like the lens of traditional Chinese cooking, and kind of like take a look at what those dishes would look like if I were to approach them as if I was approaching a traditional Chinese wok fry. And taking a look at what that would look like, which is really interesting because a lot of those dishes are not Chinese at all, they're just American food. So stuff like that, if you're interested, all lives over on the YouTube channel. So we're working our way to 2,700 subs by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit the subscriber goal, hop over and check it out. Cool. Yeah. Oh yeah, thank you. Oh, the Texas. Yeah, Zha Jiang. Yeah, the Texas. Yeah. Chinese food probably tough to find in Texas right now, or like in general. But the internet makes it really easy to get a lot of the sauces that we use. So definitely, lots of people ask me, especially folks that are like not in California or like on the coasts where it's harder to find a lot of these ingredients. Lots of people ask about substitutes, and almost everything that I use today can be substituted. So hoisin sauce and soy sauce are probably the two easiest ones to find. Rice vinegar is probably easy to find. We use some Chinese cooking wine, Shaoxing wine, which is basically just dry cooking sherry. Star anise is Actually, star anise comes from mostly American cooking, so you could probably find star anise. If you can't find star anise, the more like prominent qualities that I like love about star anise is it has like a licorice quality to it. So you could add like a licorice pod and would work. You could also use Thai basil, which would work really well too. Things like that come up a lot. So yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. Super exciting to see so many people like tuning in over and over again. I know I recognized a lot of people on the streams today and yesterday and all week too. So thank you all for tuning in. Definitely check out the recipes on YouTube if you haven't yet. Coming up tomorrow is a Japanese chicken katsu, which is coming up tomorrow morning. And then following next Monday, we'll be cooking through that recipe. So I'm going to be cooking it live here on Reddit and YouTube. So let me know if you have any questions. I'll be around doing dishes and happy to answer them. All right, later. Bye.
Slow. Come over and start up a conversation with just me, and trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. And now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Well, come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Well, come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. Last night you were in my room, and now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you. When we can, we let the story begin. We're going out on our first date. Well, you and me are thrifty, so go all you can eat. Fill up your bag and I fill up a plate. We talk for hours and hours about the sweet and the sour and how your family's doing okay. And leaving, getting a taxi, kissing the backseat, tell the driver make the radio play. And I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. Last night you were in my room, and now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you. Come on, be my baby, come on. 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 I'm in love with your body. nhưng mà bên ngoài nữa là ta sống bình thường với họ để họ thấy ta cũng bình thường.